Okay, hi everybody, and welcome to another of our inspiring conversations. I'm delighted to have with us today Professor Janice Kilpatrick, OBE and founder and director of Graven Images. How are you, Janice? Lovely to see you.
Hi, I'm fine, Eleanor.
Thank you. For those listening into the call, just to let them know, Janice is one of our recently appointed Senior Enterprise Fellows, and we were lucky enough to have Janice at our opening event at the beginning of this year. And we're now having a follow-up with Janice because we were asked so many questions on the day that we couldn't get through, and Janice has kindly agreed to this conversation. So Janice, please make yourself at home as much as you can in this COVID environment. Have a cup of tea beside you, and let's go through some of the questions that were posed to us on the day that we couldn't get through. So the first question, Janice, is about the entrepreneurial mindset. And someone has asked, this seems to have become quite a buzzword. So as someone who is a very creative, entrepreneurial person, an entrepreneurial mindset mean to you? And for us, I suppose, Strathclyde Inspire at Strathclyde, is this something we can teach people or help people to acquire in some way?
Well, I never consider myself to be an entrepreneur. I am a professional designer, and design process is the thing that underpins entrepreneurialism. I've been educated at art school to have a process that allows me to identify opportunities or problems and think constructively about how to break these down, how to analyze them, and how to come up with ideas that are got a possibility of working. And yes, that process can be taught. It's a cyclical, inductive process of you continuously refine and test your ideas and your assumptions and come up with the best possible solution. And there's always more than one solution to any problem. As one of the things that especially young designers face, one of the biggest issues is which solution do you run with? And the older you get and the more experienced you get, the better you get at coming up with solutions that are really viable.
And Janice, is that something that you do in Graven as well? So when you're employing these fantastic young designers, how do you help them? What sort of advice do you offer them to help them, I suppose, spot and hone those opportunities?
I sometimes think about, what we are as a business. Absolutely, that is what we do. And we use lots of different ways of communicating and analysing. We all draw, we all write, we all speak. We're more or less numerate. But drawn language is really important in our profession, because if you want to understand how something in the physical world works, if you draw it, if you want to understand how a door works, draw it, and you'll understand through looking how something physical works. So it's also a way of talking to yourself. Drawing is a language like writing is, although visual language is our most innate language. Human beings are fundamentally visual creatures. And it's one of the things that I think every single school child should be taught is how to draw, because without seeing in an analytical way, it's very hard to understand the world, and you're kind of denied your most innate language. So I think drawing, and it doesn't have to be beautiful drawing, it doesn't have to be the kind of drawing you'd see in an art gallery, but just drawing so that you actually understand how things are. I think also understanding culture is very important. All the intangible stuff that binds us together as a society is incredibly important when you're thinking about businesses. Every business sector and subsector has different ways of operating, and it's very important to understand what these are, because you can cross thresholds without actually understanding that you're doing something really wrong.
It's not suited, it's not what you do.
It's not appropriate for a sector. So understanding culture is really important. And I think that in our profession, the older you are and the more situations you're in, the more knowledge you have to bring to the table. There's that saying, you get from art what you take to it. I'm not an artist, but you get to any subject what you take to it. And experience is hugely important. I work across many industry sectors and quite often transpose information from one sector and another sector in order to create something new or create a different perspective. And I think that that's really important. Having experience across sectors is really important.
That's interesting. So yeah, that cross-sector, that multidisciplinary understanding. Yeah, okay. I really like what you're saying about drawing as well. I haven't done this for a while, and that's probably just because my teaching has moved on and I do different types of teaching now, but I can remember for years when I would be teaching almost like Entrepreneurship 101, the first thing I would get students to do was to draw. And they had to draw, and then I was really horrible actually. I would get them to show their drawings, and they had to explain, and they some of them were great, but some of them weren't. But they were so uncomfortable because they hadn't drawn in, this is them at university, and they haven't drawn maybe since primary school. And one of the questions that someone else has asked, and I think you might have mentioned this during your talk, but let me ask you the question in full. Some would say that being entrepreneurial is a natural state, in the same way that children are naturally covered in jagged edges of creativity. See, I think you said that. And these jagged edges tend to be worn away through external influences, possibly sometimes parents, schooling, the media. And the question then is, how do we nurture that natural entrepreneurial mindset, that natural creativity? I suppose it's the innate creativity that you mentioned. Are there ways that we can maintain that all the way through to adulthood?
Absolutely. The best person to talk about this would have been the late Sir Ken Robinson, who made it his life's work to pull apart our ideas around schooling, and that's preschool, primary school, secondary school, especially early years. It's really important that people are encouraged to think in a freer way. And sure, you need tools. You need to be able to write, to speak, to be mathematically literate, but also to draw and to be able to make things. We live in a physical world, and all those different tools the different languages should be part of who we are and how we respond to the world, not just, Excel spreadsheets and mathematics and the least innate languages. They're all important, but the most innate language really is drawing. Drawing and speaking are really important. School puts us in boxes.
Okay. Another question we had was, luck plays a large role in every success story, so some people say. What would your views on that be? How much do we post-rationalise luck? Do we create our own opportunities? I mean, I've got my own views on that, but I'd be interested in what you think.
I was always taught that luck was spelt W-O-R-K, and I think that there is an element of truth in that. I think that you have to work hard to put yourself in the right situations in order to have the possibility of succeeding. And often those are uncomfortable situations because they're not places that you feel familiar in and comfortable in. So you have to knock on doors that you've never knocked on before and get out of your comfort zone and just feel your way around the world. I mean, it's a very big place. I think also there's a distrust of creativity generally, and that's professional creativity as much as, amateur creativity. I think creative people are not trusted because we don't fit in boxes, we push the edges of things. And because design isn't a subject that's taught at most schools, people do not understand it. If you've not been taught it, then it's unfamiliar and therefore you don't trust it. But I think the situation has now become really quite extreme. I think the things that are valued are accountancy, legal professions, where there are black and white answers to things.
Measurements.
Yeah, they're empirical. Rather than things that are actually like the real world, which is uncertain, changeable, flexible, grey. Things aren't black and white.
Yeah, and almost, we can't help but we can't not mention that we're having this conversation in the midst of a global pandemic that's impacted us all in so many different ways. And what you're saying really makes me think that creativity surely now must be the time when that is trusted or looked to help us figure out what we're going to do next.
Yeah, yesterday's rules are no longer useful. The world is remaking itself right in front of our eyes. And a bit like in previous industrial revolutions, before we had economists, before we had accountants, how did we make decisions? You know, we dealt with reality as we found it every day and reacted to it. And no one has all the answers. And every one of us is able to step into that space and have a good idea about what to do next. You know, we have to obviously test our ideas and be able to articulate them, tell people about them. But that's all possible. I mean, you go through your life thinking somebody else is going to solve the problem, somebody else is going to have the answers, and they don't. Every one of us is that person that can come forward with the answer. The thing that is usually missing is just the confidence to do it and the ability to put the effort in to really get it out there, because it is hard work. You know, doing anything new is hard. It's really hard, and people will test you. They'll tell you that you're stupid, that you don't understand. You know, why should they trust you? You've just got to really believe in yourself, grit your teeth and go and do it.
Thick skin sounds like something that you need to kind of learn.
You develop it, and there's a kind of thick skin that has to have a bit of permeability. You can't be completely oblivious to the realities around you. You know, there's different ways of being with different people. You have to learn how to communicate with people in a way that keeps them on board, that keeps them engaged in your idea, and so they become an advocate for you. There's no point in just fighting with people. Fighting gets you nowhere.
Now, this is the next topic is very topical, I suppose, but very, very important, and particularly with what's happening in Glasgow, hopefully very soon. And this question is about, do you think it's possible to help ensure that entrepreneurial activity is mindful of the climate emergency, as one thing, and the other is actually used to address increasing wealth disparity rather than making that gap bigger? Could it actually be used to try to close it a bit? So I suppose there's two questions there.
I think both are absolutely vital. We need a future. That means we have to be responsible in how we use our resources, our natural resources. And I think that everything's not about money. Success isn't measured by money. I think it's very important from the outset to have a clear idea of what a good life would be. I know many people who've just chased money, and some of them have ended up in really dire situations, either penniless or, you know, having really significant mental illness. It's a real thing. Money can screw with your head. I think we all need to learn to live a good life. You know, everybody deserves a good life, and that means that we shouldn't have people in dire poverty or people who are so extraordinarily rich that it really is quite disgusting, frankly. I think there's learning to know what makes you happy is very important. The biggest part of your life when you're not sleeping is when you're working. So it's really important that the work part of your life is a good part of your life. It's something you look forward to, and that you're going to get out of your bed every day and look forward to being with the people around you and the people that you work for as well.
So Janice, on that note, I'm presuming, I can assume that your work has and does continue to make you very happy.
Yeah, I mean, it has its moments. There are days when I could see it far enough. But in the whole, I mean, I've had an amazing career. I'm not a wealthy person. I have a good quality of life. I've got great friends. You know, I've done some amazing things and met and worked with some incredible people who've been really inspiring. It's been challenging. You know, it's given me sleepless nights. It's also great when you can deliver something that brings about real change, that makes a difference. So yeah, it's, you know, life is good. It's good, and it's important to have a perspective in that, because you really need to understand what life is like when it's not good. You know, what can you do to raise up other people around you and give them access to a good life? I think that's a very satisfying thing to do.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
I'm just going to have to get my telephone. I'm sorry.
Fine. Do not worry. Get the phone.
Hello. Sorry, Nancy, can I phone you back later? I'm just in a call. I'll phone you back in about half an hour or so. Is that okay? Thank you. Thanks. Bye. Sorry, it's Nancy, my mother-in-law. Such as COVID.
Well, I hope she's okay. I hope it's a good reason she's voting for. One of the things I think you mentioned during your talk, and this was a question we didn't get a chance to ask you, what relates to sort of non-academic entrepreneurs. So one of the things that we're suggesting with Strathclyde Inspire is that not just Strathclyde University, but us and our partners, let's say across Glasgow City Innovation District, so that would include Graven and many others, and other great universities that we've got across Glasgow, we've all got something that we can give and to offer that is much more, is broader than the students that enrol with us. And I'd be interested, or the question is about how can we, I suppose, individually and collectively reach out to those non-academic entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial thinkers and creatives who are not engaging with us?
I think just open your doors and invite people in. Food and drink are always really great things for creating gravitational pull. I know that's hard under pandemic circumstances, but I think just inviting people to take part in conversations, I think people really enjoy that. I think businesses, SMEs really enjoy that. They're always looking to engage, and for the most part, they're very altruistic. I always find the businesses that we work with, you know, they're always giving things back. They're always sharing things. I think it's not true that businesses tend to think of everything in terms of IP and not sharing or giving away their specialist knowledge. I mean, most IP never does anything, you know, it sits in a legal folder somewhere doing nothing. I think that in order to deliver ideas, it takes so much work. You know, you can share ideas and mull things over with people, secure in the knowledge that no one's going to steal anything from you. I think collaboration is wonderfully energizing. That's when real ideas happen. People need people to hang out with, to do things, because, you know, it's hard. It's hard being in business. It's hard delivering visions for things or ideas for things. And the more people you've got to help you, the better.
And Janice, given that, I mean, that's certainly, I mean, I've been working with SMEs for a long, long time now, and that's always what I have found. I have found the founders of SMEs, they want to take care of their employees, of their clients, of those around them. So what you're saying certainly chimes with me. What impact do you think COVID is having on that because we are being more restricted, we can't come together physically over a cup of tea or a sandwich, and instead of that we're doing this all the time?
I think for me, the pandemic has been very polarizing. For me, I've met more people than I normally would in a year, probably. I mean, really, just because I think the public sector, their bandwidth has been completely absorbed by COVID. So the whole kind of economic development piece has been left hanging, and that's given space for SMEs to walk in and go, what about, how about? And also I think people are so keen to connect. You can actually just contact somebody either through LinkedIn or through, you know, mutual friends or a third party, you know, and just say hi to people. I've had some amazing conversations over the last year that I would not have had normally. Yeah. I think it's because it's flattened the geography. Nobody's flying anywhere. If you want to connect, you know, you do it in Zoom or Teams. You don't need to get in a plane.
So do you think could you say to some extent it has made things a little bit more democratic, that idea that you can just approach somebody, that there's not that the formality around it?
As long as you have a device and as long as you have connectivity, and that's where the whole kind of leveling up piece comes, because in my connectivity, you know, I'm in a rural location just now, it's where I live, the connectivity is not great, it's very, very limiting. And also for people who simply can't afford devices, I think we've also got to be aware that, and some of the most inventive people are actually those at the very, very bottom of the social scale. You know, they have to be inventive because they've got very little resources and they have to make the most of them. So I think that ideas can come from all sorts of unexpected places, and we should never be too prescriptive about where we expect them to come from. I think that the democracy of the devices and connectivity, though, is absolutely critical.
Next question we have is about the fact that I'm just trying to look at how we interpret this question. So the question starts with, well, we have lots of companies starting up. We have a lot of companies that don't survive. You know, I'm cautious about using the word fail here, because businesses often don't survive, and there's good reason why. And as long as we learn from it, that's a good thing. But I think what the question here is around, when we talk about entrepreneurship, clearly being a business owner isn't a job for everyone. Are we sending the wrong message to communities when we speak about entrepreneurship, do you think?
I think it has become very associated with the kind of Dragon's Den pitch about growth, about scale, about money, when actually I think we should be talking about resilience, especially with businesses of all scales are really important, because while you've got the few big corporate stones in your jam jar, you need lots of little ones in order to fill that space up, and they provide the resilience. I think that businesses give so much more than just employment for people. I think they're part of our communities, they're part of society. I also think it's important that, I mean, I've been in business now for 35 years, and I know a lot of really good businesses that have gone to the wall in that time for various reasons. People get tired, their circumstances change, their priorities in their lives change. There's lots of reasons why businesses fail. I think it's very important that businesses are part of the mentorship program with startups. The quickest way for a startup to avoid the pitfalls of starting a business is to speak to a business that's been through it. And I don't think we use our SMEs enough in that respect. They have a huge amount of knowledge and are willing to share it. We should really, speak to them more.
That's interesting. Yeah, let's get more involved in them. Okay. The next question is one I know that you will have a lot of opinions on. And this is, when we look at, I suppose, that SME base, and we look at newer businesses, arts and design related businesses still seem to be underrepresented. And I wonder, and Glasgow's great for lots of those, but I'm thinking just more broadly, what can we do, or can we and should we be encouraging more opportunities for art and design in the space of entrepreneurship or business ownership?
Art's something I probably won't speak to, because art tends to be grant funded by and large. Design is a profession. It's different. It's a business. It's about profit. I think there's a fundamental problem in that both are shoved in the same sector. They've got very different priorities, very different characteristics. They're both within creative industries, which is a very dysfunctional sector. It's never functioned for 20 years and it should usually be abandoned. Design, as well as being an industry in itself, is also a lever in every other industry sector. It's because it brings with it innovation, entrepreneurship. It's within its DNA. Mm-hmm. It should really be regarded as a lever within every sector. And as such, design process should be something that's embedded in everything from mathematics to engineering to biology to chemistry to whatever. It's a mindset and a process that can be applied broadly. It's also something that's just not taught at school at all now. I had a bit of it when I went to school, but that's a very long time ago. That was in the 70s, and it's a long time. It's gone off the curriculum. And design is a capability that waxes and wanes according to economic requirement. It was created in the first industrial revolution in Glasgow by the Fowlis brothers to commodify things that were flowing through the technological innovations at that time. And it's always been in the rise through government schools of design in the second and third industrial revolutions. We're now in the fourth industrial revolution, and there's a huge deficit in design education. Huge deficit. It's never been so bad. So we can't commodify what we produce. Yeah.
So Janice, and I suppose that is something that we should be looking not just to our brilliant schools or universities like Glasgow School of Art. We should be looking to all sorts of institutions and, I suppose, learning environments to instill that capability and the toolkits used by designers across the curriculum.
Absolutely. I mean, every major entrepreneurship program in the world has design process at its core. That's what it is, fundamentally. Yeah, and we have incredible capability in Scotland. School of Art is a world top 10 institution. It's incredible. Really, it's Scotland's highest ranking educational institution. Mm-hmm. It needs to be joined up with everything else. That's when it really gets leverage.
And the School of Art's had such a a hard time with, I suppose, the 2 fires that it's faced recently. That's put incredible pressure on other ambitions that they would have been wanting to have been doing, and they've had to divert attention to.
Still number 8 in the world.
Yeah, I think it's incredible, isn't it? It's incredible.
It's incredibly resilient.
Yeah, it's amazing. Another question that we have here is, if you could rewrite the entrepreneurial support structures in this country, what would you introduce in some? But I kind of think I might know what you would say there a little bit, but I'm not going to assume too much.
Design, collaboration, drawing. Yeah. Just getting people together. You know, if you bring people together, they will have ideas. I remember many years ago, Bob Palmer, who was a really interesting guy, who was the director behind Glasgow's Year of Culture. And when he's Canadian, and he said the most effective program he ever ran was a series of just random lunches. I think it was in Toronto, just bringing people together in the city who had never met each other. It said more productivity flew from that particular program than anything else. Just bringing people together and just trust them to get on. You know, they'll sort things out, they'll work together, they'll collaborate, they'll build businesses.
So, Janice, one of the things that you spoke about during your talk, what you did look back on history, I suppose, and you've already spoken about second, third, and now we're in the fourth industrial revolution. Why do you think it's so important for us to look back? And do you believe there are lessons that we can keep learning by looking at, I suppose, our economic and our social history?
I think Glasgow and Scotland in particular is very bad at valuing what it has in its place. And that partly comes from the fact we're fundamentally quite a seafaring nation. We're very voyeuristic. We're always playing in somebody else's country, or, you know, collaborating with some other place that sounds more exotic than ours. But actually, in terms of creativity, I think we have an unrivaled history. You know, throughout all of the industrial revolutions, we've been playing in areas that nobody else even considered. And we don't use our history as a positioning statement to allow us to move into the future. It's things like, you know, I've got this obsession with Clydesdale horses, which was a genetically engineered product that provided draft power for cities and agriculture that fueled...
Your fabulous documentary on that, yeah.
that fueled the expansion of, I hate to say it, the British Empire around the world. You know, it allowed us to cultivate the prairies and Australia and all kinds of places. We never talk about that when we're talking about Dolly the sheep, or we're talking about agricultural innovation. We just completely forget that we've been in that kind of genetic space for hundreds of years. That puts us in a really enviable position globally. We need to capitalize on our past much more effectively than we do. And I was trying to encourage Strathclyde to literally dig up its dead, because in the Ramshorn graveyard, which is part of the campus, I mean, you've got people like David Dale, who were, you know, really key in terms of the Industrial Revolution and textile production, and I mean, incredible people, the founder of Canada. There's an incredibly rich history that's buried under our streets and in our graveyards, and that we forget about it. Other people would, if they had 1/10 or 100th of what we had in terms of our historic assets, they would be running way ahead of us.
I like that. Historic assets, and you know, there's a potential there for us to draw on those, as you say, to position Scotland perhaps and have Scotland perceived globally in a very different way to what it sometimes, and in fact increasingly, might be seen as.
Yeah, creativity is an incredible resource, and the ability of a nation or a country to really use its ability to think outside of its box is just amazing. I mean, when you travel around the world, I mean, many cultures, they don't allow that kind of honesty over, you know, challenging each other around ideas. In this country, it's like everyone's open to being challenged around, you know, their ideas, having their ideas tested. I mean, we take it for granted because it's just part of our culture, but it's not so for many other cultures. It's a very valuable thing.
Janice, that's us come to the end of the questions, but I wanted to ask you, you know, potentially there'll be many young people listening to our conversation, not just at Strathclyde, but across Glasgow schools and more widely than that. And it's a great opportunity to connect some young people with inspiring women like yourself and creative women like yourself. So I wonder if there was anything you wanted to say to those young people, what might that be? If there's any top tips, or just before we finish the conversation, anything at all you'd like to say?
I would say don't wait for permission. Don't wait for someone else to come along and solve something for you. Don't think you're not good enough to have the conviction of your own ideas. If you want to change the world or do something differently, do it. Go and do it. Don't let anybody tell you can't, because you can waste your whole life waiting for permission. No one's going to give you permission. You've got to just get your elbows out and go into that space and do it. Please do.
Janice, thank you so much. I've been scribbling notes here. I've been writing down lots of things that are certainly making me think about the future. And collaboration is something that's really coming through, and that sense of getting people together in a room, just chatting with one another. But you wouldn't have thought those would be difficult things to do, because they're almost like human nature, that we want to collaborate and speak with one another. So it'd be great to see if we can do more about that. So for anyone that's listening, thank you for joining us. Thanks for listening to the conversation. You can keep up with what Strathclyde Inspire is all about and our Inspiring Conversation series. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and if you search for us on the University of Strathclyde website, you'll find us at Strathclyde Inspire. Thank you very much for your time today, Janice, and speak to you soon.
Eleanor.